So you did nothing last week. Is that correct?
No, I did something. I tried to pay attention. I noticed that I did complaining. I saw myself. I think that a lot of my life is spent trying to please other people, being a pleasing person.
What about the experiments that we did? I mean, that's nice. Did we do those experiments of saying what's going on, not just noticing it, but trying to inquire into it and understand
Well,
it?
I did inquire into it, and I think basically I want attention, is what I was doing. And I think I realized it more when I was alone and not getting attention and very needy of attention. I noticed that.
Did you see that in the moment, or is this just a thought?
No,
because you're presenting it as a thought. Did you know that?
The moment that I was alone and craving attention is when I noticed it.
Okay. So that's coming to a conclusion. The moment to notice it is when I'm actually acting on it, attempting to get attention. You don't know that in those moments, when you aren't alone, that's what you're doing. You made a conclusion based on an experience that happened when I didn't have attention.
Right.
But that's a conclusion.
Yeah.
That's not an observation, which is why it is being presented as I think. Everything that was just said was prefaced by I think. Okay? I know people get really upset with me for doing this, but if you'll pay attention to your language, it will tell you exactly what's going on. And that tells me that this is not observations, it's conclusions formed based on very little information. Okay? If it were properly presented, it would be, I noticed when I'm alone, I don't like it. And there would be no conclusion about what that means about the way I live. It would just be one observation about one part of living, okay? That here's one aspect of living which is pretty essential. I'm alone a lot of the time. Not all the time, but a lot of it. And I like it. And then I could go and say, well, what relationship does this have to a lot of the rest of the things that I do? And I would develop understanding instead of conclusions. Okay. You actually don't know that you crave attention when you're around other people. Now, I don't know what you're like anywhere else. I know this is kind of a special set of circumstances because people feel uncomfortable here for some reason. But I know that a lot of time you sit trying very hard not to have attention paid to you here. You work very hard to make sure that no one is paying attention to you. So I don't know that this conclusion is really true. See what I'm saying? So it'd be interesting to try the experiment that we came up with last week of looking at when these little gnawed eyes pop up and say, do this to get, and actually look at that moment and say, what are they telling me to get? Because I never see that, do I?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
No, because the mind was still stuck on, wow, that's a new way of looking at things. I try not to get attention here.
No, it's slow.
No, that's not slow. That's called creating a new problem and only being interested in solving that problem, which is the way that we all live our lives. Now I have a new problem that I didn't even know I had, that I'm going to have to solve. I said the value would be in noticing at the moment it comes up and looking to see what's going on then, not think about it. Your thinking is absolutely meaningless because it's based on beliefs. What we want to do is see what's actually happening. Okay? And in that moment when I'm doing something, to look and see what the motivation is, because that's never said to me, is it? when I buy a suggestion that I should please or I should complain or whatever, the reason for doing it is never said explicitly. Half the time, we don't even know what it is. Sometimes we do, but most of the time we don't. So we want to actually see this picture that we're drawing of the way that a human being functions at work. So it's not just an idea that I think about. So the next time that I tell somebody about it, I don't have to preface everything with I think. Okay? Mm-hmm. Prefacing everything with the words I think says a couple of things. Number one, I haven't actually observed this. This is based on logic, not experience. And or I'm so afraid you're going to attack what I'm saying that I'm going to warn you ahead of time. This is just my opinion so that you won't get upset with me if it's wrong. And I'll be very safe as long as I tell you this is just my thoughts. I'm not going to state it as a fact and run the risk of being attacked. Okay? I mean, it says a lot about what I perceive as the environment that I'm living in. Okay? It says one of two things. Either I'm unwilling to actually experience the environment that I'm in, so I'm going to be logical rather than observe what's really going on, which ain't all that logical. Or I'm reporting a very dangerous environment to X. I'm in imminent danger of being attacked, and I've got to find some way to ward it off. In either case, the environment that I'm in that I'm telling X about is not the one I'm actually in, is it? So I'm now out of balance. So if I look at the inner feeling that's going on while that's happening, it's not too pleasant, is it? Because I'm out of balance. I'm not in balance with the real environment. I'm in balance with an imaginary picture in the mind. It doesn't exist. So I'm uncomfortable. You understand? What happens when we are in balance with our environment is that we are at ease. Okay? That's the way man was designed to function. He would simply report the environment that he's in. X would balance us to that environment, and we would be completely at ease. So every time I'm not at ease, in any way, shape, or form, I know that I've reported an environment to X that is not accurate, and he's balancing to something that is simply not there. So I'm out of balance. That's called being uncomfortable, isn't it? Okay? So if we want to continue to live the rest of our lives in a state of more or less discomfort, well, then go on making conclusions and thinking about it. But if I want to actually learn what it means to be at ease, I need to see what I'm reporting to X. And I think most of us just have no idea what we're describing to X as we go about our day. All we know is that we're just not comfortable, and we don't know why. Now, if I look into this whole idea of the four forces and so on and balancing that goes on, and we're going to talk about it more in detail later, but if I just look at that and see that being out of balance is of course going to make me very uncomfortable, isn't that right? Then it would behoove me to know what I'm describing to X that keeps me so out of balance. Huh? So if I'm understanding what that body is saying as it sits there, it's saying, I'm very uncomfortable right now. So that says, then what am I telling X is going on? How come I'm so out of balance with the environment? See what I mean? Mm-hmm. I'm telling X that there's danger here. That's my suspicion based on the way that body is being held right now, okay? I'm telling X that there's danger here. And X is balancing me for an environment that could attack me at any moment. And there's no danger here to be tense about. So I'm completely out of balance. So I'm not at ease. See how that works? So we want to do those experiments, whether I manage to write it down or not, at least to see it. All right? Say, okay, here's the suggestion. The suggestion is that I please or I complain or I stick up for a right. Behind all the words that are in the head, that's the real suggestion, okay? And then say, what's the motivation for this? What do I think I'm going to get out of this? Okay? And see that perhaps it is always an effort to avoid a discomfort or to gain a pleasure. Okay? And say, did it work? Did I avoid that discomfort? Did I gain that pleasure?
Hi. Can we still come in?
Sure.
Yeah. How
Just
you doing?
do it quietly. We're in the middle. Just
Sorry,
have
yeah.
a seat. You don't need attention for showing up late. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes.
So we had several things we said we were going to look at. What was the suggestion? What was the motivation? What was the environment that was being described by believing that suggestion? Can I see the actual picture that I was giving to X? And see that I'm out of balance now. And then maybe to look at the whole experience and say, did it even work? Now that I know what I was trying to get out of it, did I get it? If I did that for a little period of time, I wouldn't have to sit around here talking about illusion anymore, would I? It would just be the case. I wouldn't have to spend years like some people do saying, I'm looking for the illusion. I would know exactly what the illusion is. The illusion is this false environment that I just told X I'm living in. Isn't that right? Mm-hmm. It's this motivation that says I would get or escape such and such, and I didn't. I know what the illusion is. Okay? So that's where we want to get, I hope, with this, is to make this a very real experience that says I'm living my whole life as a lie. And it's very uncomfortable doing that. I understand that. Okay. Mm-hmm. Good. Anybody else have anything to work on based on what you've seen? I'm just going to sit there and feel yucky. Oh my God, he'll attack me if I say anything.
What is the difference between an idea and an ideal?
An idea is any picture in the mind. Isn't that right? That's what an idea is, some picture in the mind. An ideal is a picture in the mind of how it ought to be. I can have an idea, which is a picture in the mind of the way things are, and that is actually the way they are. An ideal says it ought to be this way. Everyone ought to be happy. That's an ideal, because I don't think everybody is. Okay. So did anybody else work on the experiment this week? Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
Invisible now.
You're invisible now, yeah.
I couldn't do exactly the experiment you're talking about now, because I guess I didn't understand it last week.
Oh, okay.
But, so I just wrote down, complaining and blaming and pleasing and so forth. And what I discovered is that the complaining and sticking up for rights page is very long, and the pleasing thing has 2 entries on it. Not a very pleasant person.
So, well, I don't know about that, you know. There's nothing wrong with being one of those.
One of the aggressive ones.
That's right.
Whatever, I mean,
There's
every
nothing
one
wrong
of
with
it. It's just something I noticed that, and the thing about the complaining is that almost none of it was actually expressed. It all just went on in.
Went on inside the head, yeah.
Yeah. Very
Good.
Very little of it actually came out.
Good, I'm glad. That's good to... Did you understand what you just said?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of stuff that goes on inside the head that never actually gets expressed. It's still something to pay attention to. because it's part of the conflict that I live in.
So you can complain in your head, it's the same thing as actually verbalizing the
It
complaint.
sure is. You're still describing the world to X, aren't you? It's still, even if I don't say it out loud, it's still going off to X as the world that I live in. So that's a very valid concept. It's everything, not just the stuff that I actually do, okay? We want to see the whole little dialogue between these two things. Okay.
It was actually,
What's that?
there was more.
Yeah.
It sort of went on, which is that after writing exhaustively all the things that were wrong with the universe as presently constituted, but after a while, something would happen, and I'd be getting ready to report on just how terrible this was, and I'd just go, boy, this is stupid.
Yeah.
And what happened, like, there was one case where I made a wrong turn and was all prepared to do my usual, get all upset, and like, here I am, I couldn't turn around again for another mile or 3 or something. But instead of steaming about it, which is what I would usually have done, I just, oh, okay, I'm not going to be able to turn around for a while. And then because I was calm, I was able to see that I could actually turn around.
There was a place.
Huh?
There was a place.
There was a place.
Yeah.
There was a place. As soon as I accepted that I wasn't going to get my way and that was going to be all right, then I got my way.
Because the environment was described accurately.
Mm-hmm.
The non-I's would have described it as a terrible place where I'd have to wait 3 miles to find a place to turn around.
That's
They were telling me that.
And so that's the way it would have been. X would have balanced me for this illusory world. I'd decide to see it as suggestion and not tell X about it, and then I notice that the environment is not the way they said it was.
You know, this is really weird. This particular stretch of road, got on it, realized I was going the wrong way, and there's like a long concrete barrier for blocks and blocks. You cannot make a left. I mean, it's just this barrier.
Yeah.
And just as I was starting to be really upset that there was this long barrier, I realized it's the very same one that when I'm going in the other direction in the morning allows me to speed along without being interrupted by
Right.
cross traffic. I'm like, well, how can I complain about that? It vanished when I really just looked at the barrier and saw what is it really.
Right.
It just all vanished.
Right.
It was stupid. It was a waste of time.
That's the thing that I really want to try and make clear. I saw the world the way it is, instead of the way the non-I's have always painted it. And then I'm in balance. And I'm perfectly at ease with it the way it is. I see its value. Yeah. I've been balanced to the environment the way it is, and I'm perfectly at ease. That's the way we could live all the time. Except that we listen to suggestions about how it ought to be. Okay? Just, I guess, to make it a little bit clearer, what we're doing is saying, what was the suggestion? And which not I was in front. What was its motivation? Okay? And that, I suspect, will generally be to gain a pleasure or escape a pain. What was the environment that was described by that suggestion? And what Laura just said gives a real good idea of what that means to ask that question, okay? Well, I'm being suggested to by the complainer the environment is a place that doesn't have what I need in it. Then all of a sudden I decide not to listen to that, and I find out that what I need is right there in front of me. Isn't that odd? What was the other one? I thought there were 5 columns in this thing.
It was the one you got.
Oh, did you get what you wanted?
The payoff.
The payoff.
Right, that's
Did you get
4.
it?
Oh, well, I didn't do it right, so I can't tell.
Were there actually 5 last
There were
week?
4 on my piece of paper.
Okay.
Did you get what you wanted by doing it?
Yes, I know. I've heard that now 3 times. I'm actually listening. Just for, you don't know.
Yeah,
Okay.
just 4, yeah.
So the other one, the last column will be, did I get what I wanted? Now, I can't do all of those, obviously, right at the moment that the suggestion comes most of the time. There's just not time. But I can look at it later and begin to learn some things, isn't that right? Here's what I'm motivated to do. Here's the world that it puts me into. Is it working? Okay. Maybe I can do some of that last part later. Otherwise you'll drive yourself nuts if I was writing. But we have a little bit of time every evening where we can sit down and just look at this stuff, isn't that right? And I can stop keeping things in my head and start getting this as an actual experience. Right? Here's the way I live. This is what I live by. Okay? Like I say, if you didn't know to some degree, at least on a feeling level, that things weren't working, you wouldn't have come here. But now we want to get to the place where it's real. It's not just a general feeling of uneasiness, that I've missed the boat somewhere. But I can see where I've missed the boat so I can do something about it, okay? It's real hard to do something about something when you don't see it clearly. Okay. Any questions or comments about this?
When it says environment,
Uh-huh.
what am I reporting to X is the case?
That's right.
Okay.
What kind of, how have I described what's going on, in other words?
Okay.
Like your thing about the driving, right? You described to X that there was no place to turn. And so you got into this state, or could have, I know you didn't actually, but if somebody just left it at that, they would get into this state of anxiety and worry and so
Down the
on.
road for miles.
And probably miss that little place that you found.
I'm sure I would.
That's exactly right. But then when I say this environment is not real, I have to actually pay attention. And lo and behold, there's a place to turn. See? And that's what I'd like you to start seeing. It may not always be as easy as the one that Laura just said. It may take a while to see this. I'm reporting an environment to life that doesn't exist. What Laura just said is an easy place to see it. Now, I'm not trying to put down what she did, because I'm sure it wasn't easy for her to see that, but I'm saying it's really obvious once described. Isn't that right? I'm so busy saying there's no place to turn and being upset and fuming inside that I'm not looking outside anymore. That is my environment. Then when I stop doing that, I look and see, you know what, there's a place. Don't I feel like a fool? I just got upset about absolutely nothing. What a waste of time. And that's what we'd like to see. That discrepancy between what I'm saying is going on by suggestion and what is actually happening. And realize that X is constantly balancing me to an illusion. Which means that the senses are now telling X that we're out of balance, because we are. We're in balance for a world that doesn't exist. You see that? Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. I'd like to take a little diversion into one of the other ideas that we talked about when we sort of started this little thing, to make some sense out of some things I want to say. So it may seem like a diversion, but it's necessary. We said at one point that mankind is uncreated. That was one of the little things that we started out talking about. And we talked about the fact that perhaps the point of this whole show is to evolve something that is not here yet called mankind. And that the stages of that evolution are now known to us. We have all four forces. We happen to have been born in an incredible time where the fourth force is known to us. So the show is understandable now. For the first time in all of human history. Did you know that? Do you know what an incredible privilege it is to live at this moment? Everybody else who has ever become conscious up until a very brief time ago said, I don't even know what the outcome of the show is going to be. We'll never see it, but we know what it is. Isn't that incredible? But at any rate, it says that so far what has gone on is that man first went about a game of living called survival, which basically means anything that gets in my way I destroy. Okay. It's called the survival of the fittest. And what that means is that anything that interferes with what I'm doing, I just wipe it out. Okay? That's what survival is. That worked really well when there weren't very many people on the planet. But there were a whole lot of very powerful creatures that could do us in. That was an absolutely essential thing for a period of time in the history of humanity. Planet Earth is not an easy place to survive, is it? When you look at it in its raw form before man got done with it. I mean, we've made it an easy place to survive, but it took a lot of work. And that was our first job, to make this a place where humanity could survive. We did a pretty good job of that. Then some people realized that we needed some resistance to this initiative. That without resistance, it would probably wipe out just about everything on the planet, including humanity, and we wouldn't survive. So they introduced a new idea to serve a second force to survival. And that was the idea of justice, which says, curb the violence, folks. So somebody came along and said, whatever someone does to you that interferes with your aims, you provide equal force back to them, and then you call it even. You stop. You don't go all the way to murdering them. So if they steal something from you, you take it from them, and you say, we're fair, we're done. So if necessary, you go and you, with the whole weight of society behind you, and you're in the right. Oh, you're so righteous, you break into their house if they won't give it to you, and you take it back with 50 million people as witnesses, right? And you say, okay, it's over with now. That's justice. It's no longer okay to kill the person because they took 50 cents from you. Okay? You take 50 cents back, and you say it's done. So now you got $1 instead of 50 cents. You understand? You get your 50 cents back, you take 50 cents from them, and you say, it's done. That's the basic idea of justice. And along with the idea of justice were brought a tremendous number of rules for living. The fellow who made this particular idea known brought along a set of rules that you and I just couldn't believe. You think that our laws are bad now. You should see these rules. It's incredible. They covered every little thing that people did and said you have to do it this way. But the idea was to give people a set of ideas about how to live that was no longer so violent. They said it's time to be a little bit clean and consider the environment a little bit and not just walk around destroying things all the time. Curb the violence, okay? And then, just for good measure, another little twist was added onto this whole thing, where it was said that there were certain ideas, these 10 little rules that you were to live by, that came from God himself. And he said, you mustn't ever, 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 ever do these 10 little things. You've heard this story before, right? I don't have to go into detail. And these came from God. Tough guy to argue with, The idea of these 10 things were to help along this idea of justice by turning the violence that we expressed outwardly into ourselves. Because the people who gave those ideas to man knew that there was no way we could live by them. I don't think there's a single person sitting in this room who can say that they've never broken one of the 10 Commandments. Can anybody here say that? If you even remember. Can you say that throughout your entire life you have honored your parents? Huh?
I never coveted my brother's wife.
Okay. You see, no one can live by those 10 things. And it was perfectly well known. You could not do that. Now all of a sudden I've turned a lot of the violence that I express outwardly, inwardly. Because I start looking at myself and saying, why can't I live up to these 10 simple things? They're not that hard. In theory. Except none of us has ever been able to do it. Isn't that right? So now I start doubting self, questioning self, and instead of spending all of that violent animal nature that we all have on doing stuff out here, I start spending a lot of it on myself, saying I'm not good enough. See? So we provided second force to the violence that had been created through the first way of living, which was survival. Something to resist it, something to turn it in another direction, so there wouldn't be as much in the outer world. And the wonderful thing about that was that some people would begin to say, how come I can't live up to these things? God said I should. And they would start to question. And then they would find out that there were ideas here that had come from a higher realm that told man how to transform into another kind of being who actually could live up to those things. I think that if you talk to someone who has experienced that transformation, they will probably tell you that since that time, they have managed to live up to those ideas. That they couldn't before, but they do now. Because it is possible, but only for a different kind of person than the one we are now. So it got people interested in the teaching, as well as also making it possible for human beings to stay here without murdering each other off. And then a little while later, another person came along and introduced an entirely new way of living that would be to live by love or understanding and to chuck the first two. Just throw them out. They're useless. You don't need to survive. I don't know if that was clear at the time that this man talked about these ideas, but it's certainly clear now, isn't it? When you get past all the complaining and groaning and moaning, it doesn't take very much to survive, does it? You may or may not like your job, but it's very easy to get one. And if you can't, then people will just hand you money and say, well, sit on your bum, we don't care. Isn't that right? It isn't exactly a tough job. We don't need to survive anymore. Most of us, probably in our entire lifetimes, have been maybe had our life threatened maybe 2 or 3 times. Isn't that right? This is not exactly a dangerous place anymore, unless, of course, you like living in really odd places. But with just a little bit of effort, you can live where your life is almost never in danger, isn't it? In fact, I know a lot of people who go out of their way to put it in danger. Because life is so boring to them, they have to put it in danger just to feel alive. Right? So their idea of a fun vacation is to go off and risk their life. They have to add that to their life because it ain't there. Why they want it, I don't know. Forget about justice. That's what love says. What do you need justice for? What difference does it make? Who cares if it's fair? Live by understanding. That's what we were told to do next. Just forget about justice. It doesn't work anyway. It's not working. Yes, ma'am.
One of the other observations I made, I just remembered, was that they told me to get all upset that somebody else got ahead of me in the pretzel line and was going to get her pretzel first. And I was just about ready to, and then I thought, well, geez, I mean, I'm getting real upset here, and I'm only going to get my pretzel 30 seconds later. You know, why don't I just like be happy for 30 seconds and then eat my pretzel?
You mean you didn't kill him?
No, but they told me I should. They told me this is really wrong.
That's right.
And
You're not
really
gonna
a
get your
bad
pretzel.
situation, you know, and it wasn't the 30 seconds, it was the principle of the thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the way of justice. So he said, just forget about all this stuff. Live by another way. We don't need to work hard at surviving. We'll all do, a little bit of the way of survival. A little bit, not much. We'll all do a little bit of the way of justice. But mostly we'll live entirely by love and understanding, okay?
How far does it go? How far does love and understanding go? Is there any
In your life, not far.
Is there any limit? If somebody screws you over,
No, wait, I don't want to even hear it. I gave you the answer.
unlimited.
No. In your life, not far. Because you want to tell stories to show how terrible everything is.
I don't know. Not at all.
We're about to. If somebody screws you, I don't even want to get into that story, okay?
So unconditionally.
I don't know why I would want to put a condition on it. I can only see why you would want to put a condition on it, okay? You feel that you have been so badly mistreated that you must put a condition on it.
Okay.
I've lived the same kind of life you have. I don't feel mistreated.
Good answer. Thanks.
Now, unfortunately, the fellow who talked about this was sort of mistaken for a god. So we didn't pay much attention to him. I mean, about right.
We made a bunch of holidays.
Say what?
Then later we made a bunch of holidays.
Well, I don't care about that. I'm just trying to get a point across, all right? We mistook him for a god. We said, oh, this is God himself. He's come to planet Earth and stuck himself in a body like the rest of us are shit, I don't know what they thought we were. But he's special, so I don't even have to try to do what he suggested. Isn't that exactly what happened to that guy? So we don't bother to do it. Because after all, of course it's easy for God. What does it have to do with me? I'm not God. So people didn't really try this one out, did they? Even though the idea was given to us to live this way, we didn't even try it. We stuck with the old ideas. And there are so many who are living entirely by survival, they could care less about justice. There are still many who are trying very hard to make justice work, even though it's obviously unworkable. But enough actually lived by the way of understanding that it was decided that we could start the next one. We got the benefit of a very few people who actually did try this. Decided that maybe the guy wasn't a god and I could do it myself. And the same line of folks say that as long as at least 10 people do it, then it's okay. Isn't that right? Isn't there a story that says that? That seems to be the rule. If you can find me 10 people who did it, then I'll let you go ahead and do the next thing. So we lucked out over a couple thousand years. Apparently at least 10 people did it. So it said, okay, you can move on. It's not because the human race learned to live this way, although they very obviously learned these two ideas very well, didn't they? This one they didn't get too good. But we're moving on, and we're now about a new thing, which is to live a life of consciousness or intelligence. And that's what we're talking about here. Okay? To see everything from the point of view of consciousness, consciously experiencing everything that we do, and seeing it in the light of intelligence. Not just attempting to live by understanding, but to actually experience conscious intelligence in everything that we do. This is the new little thing for human beings to do. It's quite new. It's only been around for a little over 100 years. And that's what we're about here. Okay? And I've sort of noticed that when you get four things, that it's sort of finished. You actually got something. So it will probably be a very interesting thing in a couple thousand years when people manage to get this one done. I can't, to be honest with you, imagine what planet Earth is going to look like then. But I do plan on making my little contribution to that day coming one day, all right? So that some people can look back and say, well, some people did it, so now we got the outcome, the fourth force, the result. Okay? The point of all this is another one of these little parables that we look at, and things that happen in the outer world that are parables or analogies for something in the inner world, which is something that we see in the womb, which it says that's what planet Earth is right now for we human beings. It is a womb for another body called the soul or the spiritual body, which very few people ever bother to allow to grow. That we're actually still in a womb, even though we don't know it. We think we're all done. We talked about that earlier. That's an illusion. It's not true. That we're actually in another womb to grow another body called the spiritual body, which, unlike the physical body, is, they say, permanent. It doesn't fall apart like the physical body does and end. So one, it says, that has developed the soul is immortal. They will live forever. But if we look at this other womb that we do know about, we see an interesting thing, that as the fetus grows, it does something that's called recapitulation of evolution, which means that for a period of time it looks like a fish. You know? The fetus inside the womb has gills and it has the beginnings of fins and it looks like a fish. And then a little while later it loses that and becomes kind of amphibian-like, and then only way towards the end does it start to appear to be human. So they say that in the womb this body recapitulates its entire evolutionary process on planet Earth, that every single body that is born here has gone through the whole evolutionary process from beginning to end. It starts out as a little single cell, just as all life did, and eventually ends up human, after having run through the whole evolutionary process in the short time of a few months. Isn't that right? Now, if we see this as a parable for this womb that I'm in now, then perhaps we can see that each of us must do all of these ourselves, if we want to say that we individually are evolved. And just as the human physical body recapitulated the evolution of mankind to create this form, for me to fully evolve, I have to go through this entire evolutionary process. Probably take a little longer than 9 months in this case, to grow the spiritual body. Understand? So each of us will go through this process. We'll pass through all these little stages along the way of evolution. Because human beings actually did the first two, that's our birthright. We don't even have to work at that as part of natural evolution. Because we chose not to do much with the third, and the fourth is brand new, each of us must do that consciously. It won't just happen. Or at least it's extremely unlikely. So as I finish up this little thing called the picture of man, what I'd like you to understand is what you're looking at is your birthright as a human being. That you get automatically as a natural process of evolution without any effort on your part, really, a recapitulation of what mankind as a whole has accomplished to this point. It's your right as a human being to go through this. Now you can, if you like, arrest that development and say, no, I'm sorry, I'm going to stop at survival perhaps, and I'm not going to learn justice. And a lot of people do that, don't they? And we lock them up in little prisons, little cages. We're not too fond of those people that refuse to learn the way of justice. So you can stop it, but it is your birthright to go through automatically. In other words, it's kind of like mankind's gift to its individual members. Understand what I'm saying? So as we go back to drawing this picture of man called man's natural evolution, before he begins to evolve on his own consciously, I'm going to draw a parallel to this about how each of us is given the way of survival and the way of justice inside. We already have first and second floors. Unfortunately, we're going to have to work at getting the others because human beings got lazy and decided they wouldn't do that. So if people had actually paid attention to the way of love, it's very possible that each of us would be born, and part of our birthright would be to be able to love. And love wouldn't be the mysterious thing that it is here that everybody talks about. Nobody knows what they're talking about. Okay? They just yap, but they have no idea what it is they're talking about. Are there any questions or comments about this before we go back to the picture of man? I know it seems a little out there, like it has nothing to do with me personally, but it does. It's exactly what I'm saying, isn't it? It does have something to do with me personally. All of mankind developed to a certain point, and I just get that as a gift, just for being born here. Anything else that I want to do, I got to work for. And possibly one day, if enough of us work on this, then everybody who just comes in here will get it as birthright. What a place that would be, huh? Who knows what will be going on then? Oh well, we'll never see it. It's an interesting idea. Okay. If there are no questions or comments, you want to take a short break? Okay. Okay, so last week we started talking about natural evolution. And we said that when we come here, we make a sensory level decision about what the purpose of living is. We have no mind and no feelings yet. And that purpose of living is to regain the non-disturbed state. So in all things, that's what I am attempting to bring about in my environment. I'm attempting at all times to bring about an environment that does not disturb me, whatever that might be. And that causes us tremendous difficulties because Earth is a disturbing place and there's nothing you can do about it. That's just the way it is. And that as I begin to experience things, I decide a more practical idea of what non-disturbance is going to be, because you just can't do that. It doesn't take us long to kind of notice that it's disturbing here. So we come out with a new idea of what non-disturbance should be. That on the physical level, it would be to always have pleasure and comfort, so that all the sensations that I experience would be what would be me to be pleasurable and me to be comfortable, and I would never want to experience a sensation that I considered painful, and that's very personal. We cannot say what pleasure and pain is for anyone but me. One person's pleasure is another person's pain, and vice versa. Okay? And there are even times when people swap those around, isn't there? But there are times when people actually want a sensation of pain. And they don't. Or actually, they consider it to be pleasurable. Now, of course, those of us who don't swap them around think that they're stark raving mad, but it does happen. And then on the mental level, I want to experience the sensation of being paid favorable attention. Okay. And then I want to escape all sensations of being ignored or rejected. Now, there are a few people in this world who like being ignored much of the time. They find attention to be very uncomfortable to them. So again, we see that this is very personal, isn't it? They still want favorable attention. I've never met too many people who like being rejected and go out of their way to get that experience. But there are some people who prefer to be ignored much of the time. They want to get their favorable attention under just certain circumstances, isn't that right? We call those people shy. And then on another level, I want to experience the sensation of being approved of, having approval, and I never want to experience the sensation of disapproval. And so as we look at what we're doing, we see that all of the time we're attempting to gain these things: physical pleasure and comfort, attention and approval. And if we're not doing that, then we're trying to escape these things: pain and disapproval and being ignored or rejected. Okay? So we've made it the entire purpose of our lives to make sure that the sensations that the body experiences are always pleasant. Now there is a noble endeavor, if ever I heard one, wouldn't you say? Very high and idealistic. And we said that we had come up so far with 3 different methods or hows to get these, one of which was to complain. So if I experience pain on any of the levels, then I will complain until someone comes along and gives me some pleasure and gets rid of the pain. Now we can do that in some really sophisticated ways, can't we? If the body starts hurting, then I can go to a professional and I can complain to them. And they'll say, oh, I know what to do about it, and if I pay them enough money, they'll take care of it for me, won't they? I can do that with emotional pain. Isn't that right? Well, they're not approving of me. They're not giving me enough attention. What's wrong with my life? And I can go pay somebody a tremendous amount of money to listen to me complain and give me great insight into how to do something about that so I get more pleasure. And that we stick up for our rights to get these things. That's another method that we use, that we simply declare them to be everyone's natural right. And how dare you take it away from me? And as a result, we stop seeing ourselves as privileged. We believe that we have certain rights and that others take them away from me, and I must stick up for them so that I can get all this pleasure and escape all this pain again. Except the silly thing is that anything that was taken from me is not a right. Because right means something you cannot take away. So if I'm sticking up for it, it's not a right. It's just that simple. It was a privilege. And privileges must be earned. And once earned, they must be maintained with effort. So as a result, most of the privileges that we could have we've lost because we thought they were rights and didn't bother to keep them. And now we're busy sticking up for them. So I would suggest that to the sheep that we're keeping, that whenever this particular idea of how to get non-disturbance comes up, I ask myself later on, what did I do to earn that? And see if perhaps I would like to have it as a privilege. That that's something special that we can add to this particular decision, to start seeing that I could be privileged. Now, I don't know about anyone else, but this one is a very privileged being. He has many, many, many privileges and is constantly looking to find more and earn them and perhaps keep them. It's considered to be a great joy to do that by this one. But I can't do that if I think they're rights, can I? I know I've seen people that thought they had a certain right to a parking place. You ever worked at a place where somebody thought that they had a right to this little spot? And things change. Maybe the company gets new owners or it restructures itself or something, and suddenly they don't have that parking place anymore. And you notice how long they stick up for it afterwards? Boy, they're just the most mistreated person that ever was because somebody took their parking place. Isn't that right? Well, it wasn't theirs, was it? It was a privilege. It didn't belong to them. It was given to them. And it was taken away. And we said that then, after a little while, this, which is called the way of survival, is it not? All animals do this. If you look at any animal on planet Earth, you'll see them doing this exact same thing. There's nothing particularly special or human about it, is there? We maybe do it with language a lot, and I suppose most animals don't. They just make little sounds. But that's the way of survival, isn't it? To complain and stick up for my rights. How many animals on this planet stake out a territory and defend it mightily as if it were theirs? And many of them state that any female that is in this territory is mine, don't they? That's my female. Until, of course, it walks into another territory and is not mine anymore. Well, doesn't that sound human? What is the difference, huh? Other than the fact that we do it in a much more sophisticated way. But it's still the same game. It's called surviving. And after a little while, this becomes so violent that the people who are taking care of us as we grow up decide to domesticate us and show us the way of justice. And they say, you can no longer be a wild animal. We're going to create some second force here. Something to resist this way of living. It's very dangerous if someone just lives this way. I mean, of all the animals on planet Earth, I think man may be the most dangerous, isn't that about right? So we need to sort of get them to live another way, and that begins with, I must please others to get non-disturbance, because if I don't, they will disturb me. And that these two, because they are designed to conflict, you see that it is designed to be first and second force. Inside the awareness, they're designed to resist each other. So the result of that is that we go into the rest of our lives of being in conflict. I no longer know what to do. I have two ideas about everything that are exactly opposite. That's the way they were designed to be. I cannot please you while I'm sticking up for my right for you to be different. There is no way I can do that. When I'm sticking up for my rights, it does not please you. You see that? We just had a very small demonstration of that, not in a full way, but just an interesting thing to look at. Philip smokes. A lot of people around Philip smoke. It's his house, so he smokes in it. And a lot of folks have come through this place and they get all upset because Philip smokes, and they're also sensitive to smoke. And they make a big deal out of how Philip ought not to smoke in his own house. And most of the time Philip just ignores them. They have rights. See that? And that means that Philip doesn't have rights in the place that he pays rent for. Because they walked in the place and they have rights. So now all of a sudden Philip doesn't anymore. But someone else comes in here who obviously has a physical reaction. It ain't just an idea thing in their head as it is for most people that walk in here. Doesn't say I have rights, doesn't even say a word about it, makes it very clear from behavior. But not by sticking up for rights, just walks out of the room if there's too much smoking going on. And so Philip suggests that everyone smoke outside for that evening. You see the difference in the game? Because most of the time it's just a game about I have rights. And I cannot please you and have my rights at the same time. You see that? If I decide that I have the right for someone else to stop smoking in their own house, they ain't going to be too pleased with me, are they? So I can't do those both at the same time. So now I'm in conflict. What do I do? Do I sit here and suffer over my imaginary right? Or do I try to please this person that I'm with? What is the right thing to do? And I go into conflict in the head. And so anyone who actually has that experience will say that you can see how often in that situation they go into conflict. What should I do? And the mind spends a lot of time just sitting here saying, what's the right thing to do? I have to make a choice. You see? So out of this inner conflict that happens between these two ideas called survival and justice, we find it necessary to further fragment the awareness and create another little thing that listens to the inner conflict that comes from what we call the subconscious mind. In other words, we're not aware of these old decisions that are telling us what to do still, and make a choice about which one to do. Do I complain to this person that their smoking bothers me? Do I stick up for my rights for them to stop? Or do I please them and sit here and suffer in silence? See? That's called inner conflict, isn't it? I am no longer at peace the moment I am introduced to the way of justice. And then a little while later we make a fourth decision. It's again sort of thrust upon us, although we do all make the decision, except of course for the ones who don't, but it's pretty rare. But it is presented from outside. We sooner or later agree to make that decision for ourselves and internalize this. In fact, really all the way of justice is about getting a person to internalize these ideas that we're talking about on this side so that they become just as instinctual as this does. You see, this is called instinctual behavior. Nobody taught you to complain. You did it about 2 seconds after you got here, all by yourself. Everyone does it. That's called instinctive, isn't it? Nobody taught you that you had rights. Now, later on, maybe when you got verbal, because this decision is made in a pre-verbal state, this decision is made as the mind is just beginning to develop. So you don't really understand language yet. You barely have a mind. Later on, they talk to you about your rights, but nobody taught you to make that decision. It's instinctual to live by survival. These decisions, while given to us from outside, become just as instinctual as these. We act on them without thought. That's what instinct is. It just happens. Although we may well think about them, I'm not saying you don't. You think about your complaints. But it is still instinctive behavior. Okay? And this decision is made by finding out that lots of people just start telling me to just do as I'm told. Remember that? Oh, do what you're told. Why don't you just believe them? Why do you have to question every little thing? So we make a new decision that says, it is important to believe and do as my authorities tell me to get my way. In other words, if you want to be non-disturbed in this world, one of the things that you must do is find an authority that knows how to get non-disturbance and believe and do everything they say. And then you too will be non-disturbed. So of course people who hear about these ideas very quickly set up the person who's talking to them about them as the authority and think that if only they could believe hard enough in what that person says, then they would be safe and secure forever. And the person who is talking about the ideas hopefully keeps reminding them that that one is not an authority. They don't know any more than anyone else about all of living. That they just have some ideas that would be interesting to check out. Okay? And that no amount of belief in these ideas will make you safe. No amount of belief in these ideas will give you non-disturbance. It ain't going to happen. Okay? But that is another thing that has now become instinctive for us to do, isn't that right? That's part of the way of justice, isn't it? To have people who set up the way of living for us and say, just live that way and then we'll all be safe and secure forever and ever. So each of us has our little list of authorities inside that we have accepted over the years that say, if you just believed this enough and you just did it enough, then you would one day be okay. You'd be happy. If you just ate the right things. If you just did the right things. If you just believed the right things, then someday you would be happy. All right? In other words, non-disturbed. And we don't see that there are several things going on here. One is the idea of authority, which is a very old word if you look at it, that says to make something up. It says one who authors, isn't that right? In other words, I made this up and I thought it was so neat I tried to sell it to everybody else. That's what an authority is. I wrote it down and said, wow, look at this wonderful thing, and sold it to a bunch of people. Wow, aren't they stupid? It don't work for me, but, well, maybe it'll work for you. Or at least I'll get a lot of money. That's all an authority is. Somebody who made something up. And there's another thing called experts. Now this is a more real thing. This comes from the word to experience. And it says someone who is experienced with a particular aspect of living. Not all of living, just one particular field of living they have a lot of experience in. That's called an expert. And they're the easiest things in the world to deal with. They have a field of expertise. Go ask them to do it. They either can or they can't. Isn't that right? That's all there is to it. So you can't check the authority out, but you can check an expert out. They've told you where their field of expertise lies. So it's very easy to tell if they're telling the truth or not, isn't it? Just ask them to do it. I used to get jobs that way. There are certain things I claim a certain amount of expertise in. And people would say, oh, what have you done? You know, I want this whole list of credentials so that I know I'm making the right decision. And I say, look, you and I both know that since we both know about this subject, within about 3 days you'll know whether I can do the job, don't you? Well, let's just cut all this malarkey. I'll come in, I'll do it, and you know, if in 3 days you decide that you don't want me around, I'll leave. You don't have to pay me. I got a lot of jobs that way. It shocked people so much that somebody would say, put me on the line, that I didn't have to carry. I never showed a resume to anybody when I was a freelancer. I couldn't be bothered. I hate resumes. You have to sit and tailor make them for the job you're going to do. It's just a heck of a lot of work. I would not do it. And everybody said, oh, you can't get the job without a resume. You want to bet? And then there's another thing called officials. Now that word literally means someone who holds an office. It is a thing that we have created to make our lives easier, where we set up certain social offices and hire people to do the job. Isn't that right? Some of them we vote on, theoretically. I don't know how many people actually vote, but that's the idea, okay? And you put that person in the office, it's a job to do, and we agree that we will give respect to that office. In other words, we all agree, more or less, that there's some value to that office and that it deserves a certain amount of our respect. Okay? So when you go into a courtroom and you have to do all those bizarre things that are symbols of respect, if you know the game, you understand you're not respecting the judge, you're actually respecting his robe. Did you know that? That's the way the game is played. You're not giving respect to the man in the robe. It's the robe itself which symbolizes the office that he's holding. If that same man were to walk into the room without his robe on, he wouldn't be deserving of any respect. Did you know that? He'd do whatever he wants. Because that's the way the game is played. When a policeman takes off his uniform and is not on duty, he no longer is deserving of respect, because it's the uniform that you're paying respect to, the stupid little badge he wears. Same thing. And that's the way the game was originally set up. That badge is a badge of office. And it's the office that is to be respected, not the man wearing the badge or the woman wearing the badge. Because they may be idiots. So those are called officials. They hold an office. And then there's another thing called layman. And you know what the layman is?
It's all the rest of
It's
us.
us.
Yeah, but I have a technical definition. A layman is one who can't tell the difference between an authority, an expert, or an official. They think they're all the same thing. Isn't that right? So on TV, they call the officials the authorities. Because we can't tell the difference. We've forgotten this whole game. We set it up hundreds upon hundreds of years ago, and we've now forgotten the game. And we think everything's an authority. So we go to a doctor who has a certain area of expertise and ask him about economics. I say this all the time, but I've seen it. You go to some medical doctor and say, what do you think about the economy? Who cares? What does he know about economy? And then we go to an economist and we say, what do you think about the state of medicine? Who cares? What does he know about these things? I've seen these things happen. Because we've forgotten the difference between these things, you see. To us, everything is an authority that we must believe and do to be non-disturbed. So it would behoove us, as we begin to look at this idea of the authorities that are in us, even though we probably believe we have none, because some authority somewhere told us you shouldn't have authorities. Isn't that right? I mean, those of us who grew up during the 60s, that was the big cry. You shouldn't believe in authorities. Well, who said that? Some authority. All right? So we may believe that we don't have them, but it would be interesting to see that perhaps we do, and start to see the difference between these four things. That on many, many, many subjects I am a layman. On some, I may be an expert, perhaps, maybe not. Maybe I have nothing that I'm really expert at, but that may be something I'd like to develop one day. Perhaps I could be an official by taking an office. And maybe I could see that there really is no point in paying attention to authorities. They don't know any more than the laymen do. They just decided to make a big stink about the fact they didn't know anything. Okay? But I offer that just as a way to begin to understand some things about the way things really are. In the meantime, we are going to have to start seeing that much of the personality is about believing and doing as authorities tell me. That happens a lot. And you can find it very easily by looking for the things that you believe. What do I believe in? And ask yourself how you came to believe in that. And I think you'll find that on those occasions when you do track it down, that most of the time it will come down to something you read, something you heard. It is not based on experience. It's based on something you were told. Things that I have experienced for myself are not beliefs. I'm in what's known as a state of knowing on that subject. Not even I know. It's I am knowing. Because one who really experiences things knows that there is no way to know everything on any subject. So I am in a state of knowing this subject. And one day, with more experience, I may learn more about it. But I don't ever know anything. Life is an infinite thing, isn't it? There's no way I can know it. I can be knowing it. I can, in other words, be aware of certain things. Okay? Knowing is a static thing and assumes that I have experienced enough that I can know something. It just doesn't work out that way. If you go and experience more, you may find out that much that you thought you know was so incomplete, now that you have more experience, that it's all cast in a new light. I mean, most of the history of science is that, isn't it? People thought they really knew something until they made a new observation that made it all look different. And they had to recast everything in this new way because of one simple little observation. It changed everything. That's what someone in a state of knowing begins to see. So they're always open to new experiences that may change the way I see things now. Believing is not knowing in any way, shape, or form. It's not based on experience. It's based on something that I heard or saw or read or was told, if you really check it out. I would like to remind you of a little story I like to tell to illustrate this, because it happens so often and I think it's hilarious personally, which is that people find out that I talk about certain odd little things, and so one of their favorite questions to ask me is, do you believe in God? And I always say no, unless I'm particularly lazy that day. I don't. And I always think that's really odd. How can someone who talks about these things not believe in God? Well, it's really simple. I know Him. I'm in the process of knowing Him, you see. I don't need to believe in Him. Do you believe that that table exists? Or are you aware that it's there? Do you walk around saying, I believe that Ralph is here? Or do you just talk to him? I don't know anybody who walks around saying, I believe that Ralph exists. Have you ever heard anybody say that? Saying I believe it means I don't know it, doesn't it? Now, after we live that way for a little while, we are in a decidedly uncomfortable state. We've begun to report to X about a world that is simply absolutely untrue. There's very little in what we're telling life anymore that's true. So we're constantly out of balance with the real environment that we're in. So we're not too happy at this point. But we still believe very much in non-disturbance, and everyone that we talk to believes in non-disturbance and says, oh yes, it's the most wonderful thing since sliced bread, and we should all have it. Of course, most of the time we call it happy. We don't call it non-disturbance. Yes, we should be happy. And you sort of say, have you ever met anybody who was? Oh yes, I met someone. They were very happy. And we sort of look around, and it appears to us that some people are doing pretty good, isn't that right? But not me. Boy, inside I know there's something real drastically wrong here, because I've been working real hard to get this non-disturbance thing, and I ain't getting it. And we make a new decision. This one's pretty much on our own, and it basically says, I'm broken. I don't have what everybody else has that makes people happy. And I need to fix it, I need to find it, I need to get it, and we go on a lifelong quest to find out what's wrong with us so that we can fix it. This decision, to put it into words, says it is important that I be different to get my way. So we start reading self-help books. We start studying all sorts of subjects that are about fixer-uppers for human beings, right? How-to books on how to be a better person, how to have better manners, how to be a good consultant, how to do this, how to run a business, how to do everything, because I just don't know. Everything I touch turns to slime. Or at least a lot of it. And after a while, we begin to feel there is something dreadfully wrong with me. And that suggestion comes up all the time, doesn't it? What's wrong with me? How am I going to fix it? And it's all a repetition of the simple decision that was made when I was a child. Most people make this decision, I guess, somewhere around, 7, 8, somewhere around that age. And I look around, and it appears to me that everybody is happy but me and a few of my friends, you know. The ones that I really tell the truth to, and they tell the truth to me. But everybody else seems to be pretty good, pretty well off, except for me and a few other people I know. So there must be something wrong with me. I make this decision, and I find out very quickly from trying to act on it that I can't do it. I don't know how to be different. I mean, some people later on in life, they just go on the oddest quests. They're going to develop great powers. They're going to grow third eyes. They're going to be able to sit in the infinite for long periods of time with rays of light shining out of their head. Isn't that right? They just go on the oddest things to try and change into somebody else. Anything but what I am. And we can't do it. Every time I check, I'm still me. What a surprise. So I find out that all I can really do is fake it. Isn't that about right? So what I start doing is putting on new behavior. I fake it, in other words. I pretend to be different. I act as though I were different. I start doing things I really don't feel like doing because I think if I did them, then everybody would give me non-disturbance. So perhaps one day when I was in school, I saw someone smile in a certain way, and the teacher was very pleased with them and treated them very well that day. So I make a decision for the rest of my life that when you're really miserable, you smile in this certain way, and it just makes people so happy they just come up and run up and give you lots of neat little things. And I spend the rest of my life doing it, and it only worked for that person once. And it never worked for me, but now I'm different. I have this little smile, you see. So I start to act like I'm happy, don't I? Even though I'm not. I fake it. Remember when you did that when you were younger? Just started faking it. And somehow it never occurs to me that that's what everybody else did too. And that's why they look so happy all the time. And they're just as miserable as I am on the inside. They're just faking it, just like I am. Now, some people never get very good at faking it, I know. But most of us, that's what we do. We just sort of fake it. We walk around looking like we're doing really good. Just don't ask. Maybe everybody else is in the same boat I am. They're faking it too. It may be that there's absolutely nothing wrong with me. This decision was just incorrect. Okay. You see, if I've spent all of my life trying to get something that doesn't exist, it would be very easy to come to the conclusion that there must be something wrong with me if I believe it's there. Isn't that right? If I really believed in my heart of hearts that dragons were real, and I spent 50 years looking for dragons, do you suppose that at a certain point I might say, you know what, there's something wrong with me because I can't find dragons? Or it could be that dragons don't exist. You might do that with dragons. You might come to the realization they're just a story. Right? But how are you going to do that with non-disturbance since everybody agrees that it's possible? So, that's the only thing that's wrong with you, isn't it? The only thing that you really want, you can't have. And so you think there's something wrong with you. Instead of looking at reality and saying, there's nothing wrong with me. I just spent a lot of years trying to do what can't be done. I think I'll stop. It'll be fine. So around here we say that human beings have only one problem. And that problem is that they want non-disturbance. Everything else is a symptom. It's not the problem. There are no problems. Okay? If anything can actually be called a problem, it's trying to do the impossible, isn't that right? Everything else is a symptom of that, because we've tried to find ways to do the impossible, and of course it doesn't work, so we think we have problems. So we spend our lives trying to solve the symptoms of a problem and think we're being clever. It doesn't work. And a little bit around pre-adolescence, when the body starts going through tremendous changes, we make a last decision on the idea of survival. And that is that when I made this decision, number 5, that I should be different, I was wrong. I'm fine, it's all you guys that are messed up. So we make a new decision that it's important that everything else be different so that I can get my way. So we say it is important that he, she, and it circumstances be different so I can get my way. Then we start saying interesting things like, I'm really wonderful, you know, inside. It's just that circumstances have never been right for me to show it. No one has ever given me the opportunity to show how great I really am. You heard people say that a few times? Never in here, I know. But you've heard other people say it, right? It's just I've never been given the opportunity to show my true greatness. You see, that's number 6 talking. If only things were different, if only they weren't different, then I would get my way. Oh, what a wonderful thing you would see then. And so I start trying to change everything outside of me just as this one tries to change the inner world so that I can get my way. You know, I managed to keep the conflict going, you see. Thank goodness. Because I don't know that I would want no conflict for this decision. What do you think? How'd you like to spend the rest of your life knowing that everything was because of you? Fortunately, you get some conflict going and you think occasionally it might be somebody else, isn't that right? I don't think we could live under the weight of that without the conflict. What do you think?
It's no fun, but I've done it.
So my life becomes a story of conflict, of constantly listening to these altering ideas that don't agree. What that means is that I have tremendous difficulty making up the mind, isn't that right? On anything that is at all important to me, I have a real hard time deciding what is the right thing to do. That's called being in inner conflict. Instead of just doing something, I spend all my time inside the head running through conflicting ideas of what will happen. Well, if I do this, then that will happen. But if I don't, then this will happen. But if not, then. And that's what we call making decisions. My life becomes a struggle because it's all about getting something that simply does not exist. A state where I will always have pleasure and never have pain. So I'm constantly struggling with everything that I do, because if I just could do this, then everything would be okay and I'd be finally happy. And I live with constant resistance to my purpose. Everything that I try to do meets with tremendous resistance because my purpose is impossible. And when we began to talk about this, we said that our very purpose of living says, I will hate the forces of creation called resistance. Now we have a perfect setup here to have plenty of resistance to anything that we do, don't we? Which means that if I began to value that resistance, I would grow so fast you wouldn't believe it. Except that our purpose tells us we cannot possibly like it because resistance is most often disturbing. So we actually prevent ourselves from growing and remain as a child, which is what this is for the rest of our lives. We never go beyond this state. We never find out what it means to love or understand other people. We find out how to be tolerant. We find out how to be condescending. We find out how to enjoy something that's to my taste. We find out how to feel sorry for self and others. But we don't find out what it truly means to love, because we fight the resistance that would have allowed us to get to that point. So we stay stuck as kids. One of the things that I would like us to see is that this is our birthright as human beings to have what we described up here. Most people see this as a terrible state of affairs. In other words, they look at it and say, this is the source of my problem. It's not. The only problem that I have is I want something that doesn't exist. This is not the source of the problem. This is actually the solution to the problem. Did you know that? It's there to provide you with all the second force you could possibly use so that if you decide to initiate, if I identify it as the problem, then once again I am resisting second force, which will destroy me. If I see this as a wonderful gift that will allow me to grow to a conscious state, then I find I can work with it very easily. Okay. Are there any questions or comments so far? Let's take about a 5-minute break. I've got maybe about 15, 20 minutes and we'll get out of here shortly. All right? Okay, my friends, any questions or comments?
Phil,
Yes.
in reporting, I'm not really sure the question. I think in reporting the resistance,
Reporting what? Oh, resistance.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what you have written there in the center is around it. You have the 6 not eyes.
Well, I
So-
just put it there.
Right. Okay.
Running out of room. I don't know if it goes there now.
Okay. So in reporting the resistance, we're just again, just reporting what's happening.
Not if you understand the 4 forces. It wouldn't just be a matter, I mean, you can, there's no right or wrong to any of this, but if I understand the 4 forces, I would look at the resistance as something of great value, wouldn't I?
Mm-hmm. Because it can,
That's what's going to make
Create.
this possible.
yeah,
To initiate without resistance would go nowhere.
right.
Okay. So perhaps I would not only like to report it, but in time, not maybe right this second, but be able to report it and say, thank goodness it's here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
So,
That's why we spent time, before we even got into this, saying, can you see the 4 forces at work?
mhm.
So when we start seeing this internal resistance called the personality,
Mhm.
this child that never grew up inside, that's telling me how everything is,
Mhm.
that I could simply see it as a resistance to my effort to be conscious. This is not conscious.
Mhm.
And value it.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. These ideas that we put up here of the how to get non-disturbance, it doesn't work. We technically around here call not I, so you will hear that term quite a bit. Because they do pretend to be me. In the thoughts, they use the word I. They don't say things like, hi, this is childhood decision number 1. Why don't you complain to get your way? They say, I'm really being mistreated. I don't like it. I'm going to tell them. After all, I saw a show where it said, tell them when they hurt you. Tell them how to do it right. So I even have an authority on my side. That's pretty good. Huh? I managed to get both sides working at the same time on this one. That's pretty unusual. I'm going to do this. That's what it says, isn't that right? So we call them not I's to remind ourselves that this is not I speaking. That I really don't know what the I is anymore. Understand? I've lost the I in all of this. Somewhere in here there is a real being. And that real being is being told only what the chooser decides to tell it. It doesn't even know what's going on inside itself anymore. All of these things are unknown until someone points them out. They're what's called unconscious. The only thing that we hear is what the chooser says, which is given as I think such and such. I believe such and such. And the real part then sends that off to X as truth. It is factual and it's valuable. Except it's not, because it has never worked. except maybe for about 2 minutes in childhood. Some of them never worked. A few of them did.
You say the chooser is the not I?
No. The not I's are all of these decisions, these 6 decisions about how to get non-disturbance, okay? What happens is when I come to a conclusion about something I know nothing about, such as living, and how to get non-disturbance while I live, and there's some feeling on that conclusion, it doesn't just sit in the memory as the memory of an event. It grows. Something happens to that conclusion inside me, and it becomes what is known as a personality. Okay? In other words, it becomes what appears to be a living being, but is not. So we might call it an entity, because it is not alive. It's a memory that grew into a monster. Okay? There is way down in what is called the unconscious mind a recording of an event, which was a time when I concluded that if I just were to be different, then everything would be okay. That's a decision or a conclusion that I came to at a certain point in my life about the way things are. I didn't know that was true. I hadn't tried it yet. Isn't that right? When I formed that conclusion, I hadn't tried it yet. So I obviously didn't know if it was true. Now, you've tried it for a few years. Does it work? Or does it just torment the hell out of you? But see, a conclusion that's made with feeling about something I know nothing about becomes a whole personality that's all about me being a better or different kind of person. And so now I'm still doing it many, many years later, even though it doesn't work. I do it without even thinking about it. Because this little personality every once in a while jumps up and says, oh, if only you were different. If only you shaved your head, then it would be okay. I don't need to tease you about it. I just couldn't resist.
I don't grow hair.
Okay, I don't care. See, if only I wore the right clothes. If only I had the right job. If only I had the right mates. If only I didn't think these terrible thoughts. These mean, evil thoughts. If only this, if only that. This one pops up and says, that would make everything okay. And it runs through the head as I should do such and such. If I did this, then that would happen. And it seems to be me saying this, but it's not. It's just an old decision made many, many years ago that is now a personality. So I don't have one personality. I have at least 6. One that believes complaining will get me my way. One that believes that sticking up for rights will get me my way. One that believes that blaming everyone else will get me my way. One that believes that pleasing will get me my way. One that believes that authorities can tell me what to do to get my way. And one that says that if only you were different, if only I was different, then I'd get my way. And they're all arguing with each other about how to get my way. Because none of them work. Okay. And I call that thinking. One second, okay, I'll get your question. Now the fact is I don't have 6 personalities, I actually have billions. Because what happens is every time we make one of these decisions, we remake it over and over again, isn't that right? So every way that I complain is a separate personality. Every right that I believe I have is a separate personality. Because it's a new decision that I made based on this original decision. I made again. I have this right. Now I have that right. Every different way that I try to please someone is a separate personality. So not only are the two sides arguing with each other, but these guys argue. You should please them this way. And then another pleaser comes along and says, no, that won't work. You should please them this way. Isn't that right? And now you have to decide which way to please. And then as soon as you do, this one will say, well, what about my rights?
So how do you get out of that?
Huh?
How do you get out of that? Which I know is what we're all talking about, I realize that.
Well,
Just see it?
which decision is that based on? Which personality is that just asked that question?
Oh. Complainer. And,
Sure sounds like 5 to me.
trying to be different.
How can I be different?
Well, I don't like it. I mean,
Yeah.
as a complainer.
If you liked it, why would you want to be different? I mean, why would anyone want to be different if they like something, okay? You don't get out of it.
Okay.
You use it as resistance to an attempt to learn to act consciously again. You're not going to understand it. I'm not.
By doing it, okay, good. By
I've
doing
been
it.
through this over and over and over again. Every damn week you ask me a how question, and every damn week I say I don't know how to do it. Because I don't. There is no how. Every week we go through this. I am obsessed with how because I'm trying to do the impossible. Why don't you try to do the possible, and then you'll discover that you don't need a how because X knows how to do everything. I'm like, we suggested a few weeks ago that one do an experiment to find out that there is this incredible thing called X in the life. I can't be responsible for the fact that you chose not to do that. Okay? That does the how. Why don't you try doing the what? Okay? If I will do as the teaching says and make an effort to be conscious of the first thing that I can be conscious of, which is what is going on in self, I will meet with plenty of resistance. I will find it almost impossible when I begin, which is why you're sitting here asking me a how question, because you've tried it and it's hard. There's resistance. When I try it, a little knot eye pops up and gives me a suggestion, and I fall asleep, and I forget that I was going to do that. That's called resistance, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And I'm not grateful for that resistance. I do not see it as what will make it possible for me to be conscious. I just bitch and think it ought to be different. Mm-hmm. Okay? Try initiating. We've talked about this many times, you and I. Stop figuring it out and just try doing it. Figuring it out is a thing called analysis. I want it all explained and made perfectly clear. And what happens when I analyze something, Mike?
It dilutes it.
What?
It dilutes it.
No, it
makes
doesn't.
a concept.
No, it doesn't. If I bring you a flower in here and say, analyze this, what will you do?
Oh, tear it apart, basically.
Is it
Destroy it.
now living?
No.
Have you destroyed it?
Yes.
Do you get it?
No.
How can I say that more clearly? You take a living thing, you analyze it, and rip it to shreds, and it dies. And I say, can you see the analogy to what you're doing called analyzing and figuring out without actually doing it, and you don't get it? Mike, you're destroying it. The more you try to figure it out, and the more you analyze it instead of just trying it and seeing what happens and experimenting with it, the less it works, because you're destroying it. Or let me give it to you another way as an analogy. If I were to go outside and plant a seed, and every day I wondered if it was growing. Haven't you ever had that happen where you plant something and you want to know if it's growing? Well, I could go dig it up and see. Well, sure enough, it hasn't grown today, so I put it back in the earth. tomorrow, I've just got to know if it's growing. So I go dig it up, and sure enough, it hasn't grown yet. Now, what do you suppose is going to happen to that seed?
It ain't gonna grow.
I think it'll die. What do you think? This is the seed of something. You do what's appropriate for a seed. Okay? And analyzing it, ripping it to shreds, and checking on it constantly to see if it's growing and working, you'll simply destroy it. And you'll be left with a shell, not a seed. A dead husk. Okay? It's just the way it is. This is about living. It's not a mechanical thing where you can rip it apart and put it back together again and it'll be okay. Living things, once you rip them apart, you can put them back together again. I don't know anyone who can rip a living thing apart and then put it back together and go, and it's alive again. It's dead now. These things are already dead. Analyze them to your heart's content. Maybe they'll break. Okay? That's where analysis is properly used, on the self. Stop analyzing the method if there is one at all. Just do it. See where it takes you. Any other questions or comments? Did I finish that idea of personality? I don't think I did. So the personality is actually composed of many, many entities called not I's, each of which is absolutely certain that it knows how to get non-disturbance. I experience that as constant thinking that's in conflict, that goes through the chooser, which we call the conscious mind. I don't know why. I don't know what's conscious about that. If I'm unaware of where those thoughts came from, I don't know how I can be said to be conscious. That's, to me, unconscious. You see. But we call it that. And finally, the chooser makes a decision and picks one of these personalities and says, okay, this is the right one to say now, and that gets reported to X. And X attempts to balance to the environment as described by the not I. Except the environment that the not I is describing happened when I was 2 seconds old, in the case of complaining. Or it happened when I was 7 or 8 years old in the case of self-improving. Or it happened when I was 9 or 10 or 11 or something around there in the case of blaming. Is it here now? See, I'm describing an event that happened many years ago when I originally made that decision. That's what I see. Even though it's not here, because I believe what that not I says. So I see things that way, even though it's not here. When number 1 says I'm being mistreated, I believe it. I believe there's someone out there mistreating me, even though there's not. But I tell X there is. X balances me to a fact that's not there. I fall apart because I'm actually out of balance. I get uncomfortable. My purpose of living is to be comfortable. I ask an I to help me get me out of this terrible discomfort that I'm in. It describes an environment to me that doesn't exist. I tell it to X. I balance to a non-existent environment. Now I'm even more uncomfortable. And that's called living. Okay. So what we're going to do is try to become aware of this inner environment that I'm in, which is telling me about an outer environment that doesn't exist. I can't possibly see the outer environment at this time. Much as we would like to believe that we're seeing the world as it is, we're wrong. We're seeing it through the eyes of a child. was ignorant. Okay? It just didn't know. It's not bad, it's just that child had no experience yet. And that's the way I'm seeing it, is through the eyes of a child. So there's no point in trying to figure out what's going on out here any more than I already do. We'll just leave that alone. Because I can't possibly see what's going on outside of me yet. So we'll work with what we can, the inside. That I can start to learn to describe accurately, because we've been given the information that says what's there. All I have to do is go find out for myself if it's true. And I can start describing this inner world to X. And so here's what's going on inside me. That I can describe accurately. Okay? Now I may begin to balance a little bit better to a true environment, because I'm describing at least part of my experience of living accurately. I'm still not too good with out here. But at least I'm beginning to describe in here accurately, and I'm going to be a little bit more in balance, you see. Because some of the times I'm going to be saying, these guys are telling me such and such is true, and I don't know if it is or not. Well, that's an accurate description of my world, isn't it? I can get into balance with that. X can balance me, in other words, to something real. And that's what changes this mic. Not any direct effort of my own. What changes it is that the eye begins to do its job, which is to describe its environment accurately. And X balances to that. You keep wanting to stay exactly as you are and have magic happen. And it won't work that way. Not just you. I'm just using you as an example. We want to not do our job. We want to be able to stay a child and get the benefit of being an adult by magic. An adult starts to describe accurately. Someone who's growing up and finishing their little thing called evolution starts to describe. You start where you can, on the inside. You don't even try to do it out here. You don't even try to change what you do out here. That happens as an act of balance between what the awareness says is going on and X putting that back into balance. If the awareness says I'm being mistreated, then it's perfectly reasonable to act the way that it was said, to complain or stick up for the rights or blame, to please or quote authorities, or to try to be different. It's perfectly reasonable, except that it's not happening. It's reasonable for a child to say they're being mistreated. They're helpless. That's a reasonable thing, isn't it? I'm not helpless anymore. It's completely ridiculous to say I'm being mistreated. What would be more proper would be to say, I'm staying here. That's what I'm doing. I'm not being mistreated. I'm sitting here while they do that. I'm responsible, in other words. You can't mistreat me. The only thing that can happen is you can do something that I don't like, and I sit still for it. We had a little discussion earlier tonight where we said to someone, so I suppose you go around saying the alarm clock woke you up. Isn't that what you say in the morning if you wake up to an alarm clock? The alarm clock woke me up. Oh, I see. So nobody ever said it and said, make this really loud noise at a certain time. It just decided all on its own to make this noise. And you were just totally not expecting it, and it woke you up. I thought you woke yourself up by setting the clock for a certain time to make a noise that you think might disturb you. And I suppose you say that coffee keeps you awake. Isn't that right? You walk around saying, if it does, coffee keeps me awake. You didn't drink the coffee. It just jumped into your mouth and kept you awake. What a world we claim exists. It's the same thing with being mistreated. You mistreated me. No, you just did whatever you did, and I stuck around. Put up with it. Because these guys told me I'm still a helpless infant. There's nothing I can do about it but connived and manipulate to get you to stop. I'm either going to haul off and whop you, either verbally or physically, or I'm going to try and tell you how to change by pleasing you or quoting authorities at you or trying to be different until you stop doing this. Instead of just saying, I ain't putting up with this and walking off. I'm not helpless anymore, but I'm constantly telling X that I am. And so I have to do the things that an infant would do to deal with this environment that's not here anymore. I'm not an infant anymore. I don't need to do these things. But that's the world I described to X. So X balances to that world just as if I were still 2 years old or 6 years old, helpless. Because I was that. So the beginning of doing something about this, Mike, is to just describe it so I can get into another kind of balance. Okay? To start being conscious of what has until now been something that was not conscious of me, which is called my inner world. Then maybe we can see the outer world without the distortions of these old ideas that are meaningless now. They were accurate once, perhaps, but they're not now. Okay? Let me just do one more thing because I will never remember next week that I didn't do this. Okay? There's another level that develops in us, which we also experience sensations on. This level is actually developed to allow me to finish evolving. That's its only purpose. In other words, unless you're in a state of evolving towards consciousness, you have no idea what this is for. It is only created in potential, in fact. It actually has no use until you begin to live life consciously. But we have to do something with it, because we do experience sensations with it. And out of that we discover that there is a new form of pleasure called being important or needed. And I feel a tremendous pleasure out of feeling needed by others, isn't that correct? Perhaps we get it from our job. Perhaps we get it from infants that we take care of. Perhaps we get it from our relationships. We try very hard to get into relationships where the other one needs us. And there are a few other words because this is so unknown to us that it works in a lot of different ways. We don't understand really what it's for. We also get a tremendous pleasure out of being appreciated, which is really the same thing, isn't it? That's just you acknowledging that you need me. We discover that we have a tremendous urge for power over self and others. Because then I'll know that I'm important and needed. I'm having an effect on the world around me. And I discover that I cannot stand being insignificant or inferior or unneeded. Okay. That is very unpleasant to me when I got lazy.
You're tired.
I cannot stand the sensation that someone is not appreciating what I have done. I am unappreciated. That is very unpleasant to me. I will go to great lengths to change it into pleasure again. And I cannot stand feeling that I am out of control or powerless. Now, all all of these are an abuse of this level. It's actually designed for an entirely different purpose. But it's only activated by someone who begins to see that there is nothing in this world that is important, much less me. That there is no such thing as being superior or inferior. There's only a bunch of different people walking around here. That I cannot be significant. There is no such thing. There's no way for a little lump of protoplasm sitting on a mud ball to be significant. And hopefully I one day learn that I do not want power. I have absolutely no interest in power. So anyone who talks about these ideas says that the first thing that's got to go is the urge to power, so that this level can begin to grow properly. It's being misused by the desire for these things. Okay. We'll talk a bit more about this, but I wanted to just, like I said, since there are 4 here, I don't say it now, I'll forget that I've left it out, and I'll just leave it out forever. So this little thing comes along too. Many of the things that I use these 6 ideas for are to gain these pleasures and avoid these pains as well. Okay? So we've got several more eyes to add to the list to be observing and seeing what their motivation is in the environment that they're reporting, and see what the outcome is for, okay? Any questions or comments? We've gone long enough for one evening. Probably, yeah, a little after 10. No? You know what to do?
No.
Same list that we talked about earlier.
Same thing
this
like,
evening.
okay, I do
We'll
that.
just add 3 more onto it to see, which of course you've already been doing,
Idea.
as you know about them.
No, I was just doing those 3, because that's what you told me to do.
Oh, okay.
Always
Now-
do what I'm told.
Now we'll see, hopefully, everything that the personality does. Except for one odd little thing.
I'm going to throw 7 up tonight.
Yeah, we're going through this out again real quick. Which is a decision that I make that basically says, I can't take this anymore, I gotta do something about it, okay? I want to be real. I'm talking about it different than last time,
Yeah.
okay? I want to be real. I want to complete this thing that I came here to do. Okay? And I suspect that most of you who are here have made this decision. So you may occasionally notice that coming up in self, all right? That is the potential in us to transform, to become an entirely new kind of being, which is what all this is talking about, is that I made this decision and it makes it possible to activate this other part of me so that I can continue growing. Okay? When I see that it's not about me becoming important, it's actually about me becoming realized, created. Okay? So you may see that occasionally. You can write that down. Okay, my friends, we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
You're welcome.